So let's welcome you again to today's Zoominar on policy briefs as an effective science communication tool. I have to say I'm not an expert, but I like to write policy briefs. I think it's fun. I do have a background in environmental science and natural resource management. I work both in the field on a research cruise in the mangroves, but also in the policy world for the parliament in Germany, a private consulting firm, and for different German ministries. I'm working at the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research in Bremen, and here I'm heading the Office for Knowledge Exchange, which is a unit at our institute that supports transdisciplinary dialogue, stakeholder engagement, and transfer activities. So we are a German research institute that works solely in the tropics. One of my major activities is to edit the ZMT policy brief series. So I support drafting the text, layouting, and dissemination. Coming back to today, so what are our objectives? Today I would like to introduce to you the ZMT policy brief series and provide a little bit of guidance on how to write a policy brief. We will learn from an example and also develop some and discuss some ideas for policy briefs. So we have a couple of short inputs and 2 exercises today. So let's start with a simple question. What is a policy brief? It is a very concise document that is aimed for decision makers or policymakers, but it's very, very open in the format and also in layout and style. But they do have all some structural elements in common, and they kind of sum up your research in 6 bullet points and provide some form of recommendation. The ZMT policy brief series, here I would like to use as an example. We try to publish about 5 policy briefs annually. The policy brief series illustrates the high practical and political relevance of our research. So we use it also for profiling, but of course also for implementing our mission, which is to support building knowledge and capacities for making better decisions in ocean management. So provide recommendations for environmental policy and sustainable development. Actually, our latest policy brief is focusing on the Western Indian Ocean region. It's about fostering marine biodiversity data sharing. So we produced that in collaboration with IMS from Zanzibar, Tafiri, WIOMSA, the Nairobi Convention, and Cordio. If you're interested, I guess some people of you might be working with biodiversity data. Feel free to download it from our webpage. So I would ask you now to just post in the chat, what do you think are good reasons to write a policy brief? Anyone? A good reason to write a policy brief? Why are you interested to learn about policy briefs? Okay, maybe you need some more time to write. I'll give you some hints. So good reasons to write a policy brief. Policy briefs can make research effective to policy and society. They can close knowledge gaps, make research and also the value of research, why research is important, visible. I think you will improve your communication skills while writing a policy brief. You'll be a better communicator. Can also qualify for work outside academia. Decision makers, of course, who are our target, can benefit from higher capacity to make decisions and evidence-based decision making. Let me have a short look at our chat. Thanks for so many answers already. And I think they pretty much translate scientific data into a format that policymakers can use to implement your recommendation, share information promptly for decision makers, easy communication of complex science, to make sure extensive research is informing policies, communication to policymakers on recommendations, bridging the gap, dissemination, it's all true. So thanks for that. Let's talk about the so-called target audience and also potentially about your target audience. So again, a question for you to answer in the chat. Can you name some decision makers from the context that you are working in? What do you think are people who make decisions? Who's your target audience? So we have politicians, local legislator, government official, provincial and national government officials, local authority officials, public servants, chief justice and the principal judge, policymakers, coastal managers, Department of Environmental Affairs, head of departments and ministers. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it well, but you have a little focus on the policy side. So decision makers are a very broad range of actors. So of course, politicians and officials, you name them, but there are also other people to consider that might be interesting as a target audience for your policy brief, which are policy analysts, also development practitioners or donors, and of course, ecosystem users, if they are, especially if they are involved in co-management, managers, and also community leaders. So to help you identify your target audience, you can ask yourself, yeah, who will implement actually the action or the change that you ask for, or who may broker your message. There's some interesting guiding literature online on writing policy briefs. One of which I like is from the FAO. What are policy briefs? So here is a picture where they differentiate between two basic types of policy briefs. So one is the advocacy brief that argues in favor of a particular course of action. And the other one is an objective brief that gives balanced information, so a policymaker is informed and can make up their own mind. So I would always try to strike a balance in between. And I think it's always helpful to have a message that you want to transmit. How do you identify and connect to your target audience? I can only recommend to talk to partners and colleagues about who the relevant decision makers are and how to best approach them. What I also do working remotely from Germany to find out who's actually in charge in the country we work in is look up social media. So I would go on ResearchGate, LinkedIn or Facebook and just see who's actually working in fisheries in the country we are writing our policy brief about. Connecting to the audience is important. I think also to consider other people to co-author your policy brief is helpful. So with partners, a policy brief can gain more visibility and also legitimacy. Having a reality check for us also, again, very important since we are working in Germany and I wouldn't feel too comfortable to provide recommendations in a policy context coming from Germany without, having talking to partners at site. Also, it can be helpful to ask who else can help you to reach the audience. Boundary organizations such as environmental NGOs are really good knowledge brokers. There are maybe sometimes people from press or like online bloggers can also be helpful in dissemination. I wanted to show you my three favorite questions that I like to pose when I review a policy brief. So the first one is always, who's the audience of your policy brief? This is really tricky, but knowing your audience will help you to write something that is more targeted. So the second question I would ask is, what is your central message that you would like to transmit? It really is helpful to define that and pin it in front of your desk and come back to it again and again. Another question that often comes up when I review a policy brief is, why is this piece of information relevant to the policymaker? So sometimes scientists tend to put a lot of interesting facts and knowledge or defining what needs to be known, but you need to filter your text to look what actually are the findings that support your argument. So a little bit more about the key message. I think that is especially true if you write an advocacy brief. So it is essential to have a clear, simple message to reiterate. So what is a good key message? I would say keep it simple, be passionate, make it local and audience relevant. It's helpful to use examples and to tell stories and to avoid jargon. So you would, as I mentioned, keep coming back to a key message. Somehow, I would say a synthesis of your research findings, different publications combined with your expert opinion. But remember that it's not an opinion piece solely. An argument needs to be based on scientific findings. Wanted to give you an example on how we disseminate online. So we would prepare this picture that we share on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, where we have the key message. For example, here it's about a policy brief on social participation in ocean management in Brazil, where social participation is threatened. It needs to be safeguarded by supporting effective and adequate representation of civil society. So this is the point that the policy brief tried to make. And we also try to make it more personal with a picture of one of the authors. And we actually also, for this, is also interesting to know that in Brazil, our colleagues told us that one of the best channels to distribute such information is WhatsApp. So we also prepared a package that we shared through WhatsApp groups. If you're interested to know more about principles of writing a policy brief, we also prepared an info sheet that you can find online. What should a policy brief contain? To achieve its objective, a policy brief should be short and to the point. It should focus on a particular problem or issue. You wouldn't go into all details. Instead, you would provide enough information for the reader to understand the issue and come to a decision based on firm evidence. So it's just not one or two experiments or a single year's experience. It should draw on evidence from various sources, preferably from several different areas. So you would try to rather focus on meanings and not methods. So the readers are interested in what you found and what you recommend. They do not need to know all the details of your methods, for example. You would try to relate to the big picture. The policy brief may build on context-specific findings, but it should draw conclusions that are more generally applicable. I wanted to highlight two principles that I think are, for me, most important when writing a policy brief. First of all, it's to cooperate. If you cooperate with partners and experts as co-authors, that will generally improve the quality of such a publication. It also supports the identification of the target groups and help you to get a better picture about policy processes. It incites more interest and improves outreach. That means you also should acknowledge partners with involving them with a logo and also naming the institutes and names in the policy brief. Another principle that I find is interesting is to deliver. So after you ask yourself who the audience is and how you will disseminate, you actually need to deliver the policy brief. So even if you have an excellent policy brief, it has no impact if it's not delivered, if it just is kept in one drawer and not published. Yeah, delivering is not so easy. So you would try to find the right audience in the right ways and at the right time. So we talked about the right audience, but what is the right ways? For us, it would also mean to translate and publish the policy brief in the language of the audience. Also thinking about, do you actually need prints or are virtual copies sufficient? What channels does the audience use? And the right time is also important. So what would be the worst time to send out a policy brief? I would say Friday evenings, because no one will read it. So yeah, just be aware of maybe also events that line up where you could publish your policy brief. Wanted to come to a little bit of theory about the right time. Kingdon in 1984 developed this 3-stream model. So it should suggest that policy change comes when these 3 streams of problem solutions and political events come together, when they connect. So in the problem streams, the awareness or the identification of a problem develops. So for example, marine plastic pollution is a problem. In the proposal stream, this is where, or in the solution stream is where we develop proposals to overcome the problems. For example, that would be a ban on plastic bags or something like that. And in the policy stream, you would have the ability or the political will to act. So if these 3 streams connect, you have a policy window, and this is what we ideally would aim for. I wanted to come to the structure and wording of a policy brief, or how we at least do it at ZMT. We have structural elements. Well, actually, there's no one-size-fits-it-all approach to writing a policy brief, because the topic and audience will shape kind of each policy brief. However, the policy brief tend to contain the same key elements and thereof have similar structures. So mostly there's a summary, an introduction, an overview of the research or problem, and an examination of the findings, and a concluding section that explains the policy recommendations and implications of the research. Though you might have the least experience in formulating recommendations for policy, it's the essential task here. So it might require some additional thinking or research on how to formulate that well. I think for policy brief, the first page is the most important. So it's good to have everything on the first page, to have a good summary, and also some information about the results and the recommendations. So in our policy brief, we have this blue box that you can see here, where we have key results and recommendations. And the first page really provides the whole overview of the problem, also the political relevance, key research results and recommendations. So just to keep in mind that the relevance of the research to policy needs to be clear, so that the policy's actors' attention to read further. So coming to the context, this is for us, it's usually the second part of the policy brief. We would put the research into context. Here it's important to describe why the problem you address is socially, environmental, or practically relevant. What is the political legal relevance? So it kind of also delivers some essential facts that convinces the audience that the problem requires attention. In terms of the research results, that is also a section that we have. We illustrate and summarize results in a short sections and have strong and meaningful figures and boxes. But these results must lead to the policy recommendations so that you're creating a coherent argument. Different to academic writing, I would say, is that you have generally have shorter paragraphs or shorter sentences. You use strong and meaningful, relevant and simple figures and boxes. You can use colors, boxes and bold text. I would not include, for example, a picture of a trophic model because I think it's too complex to grasp for a decision maker usually, but maybe use a different, more easy to digest by a lay person figure. So how to write policy recommendations? It's good to state the recommendations clearly, that they are easy to understand. They need to be realistic. So the recommendations need to be implementable, politically, economically, socially, and technically feasible. It's good if they are easy to find, for example, on the first page. Just keep in mind that many readers will skip straight to the recommendations and without reading the rest of the document. It's good to keep it short. So rather focus on a couple of important recommendations and don't overwhelm the reader with too many of them. It can also helpful to use examples or comparisons. Here, for example, this is 3 times as big as Zanzibar, or use metaphors to explain the recommendations that you work on. So examples of some good wording of recommendations I find is, for example, harmonize legislation on data sharing in the WIO region. I think that's pretty much clear what to do. Or optimize sustainable exploitations of reservoirs through targeted stocking. Examples which I don't find that good are anti-fouling ship paint should be banned to use. Because here, for example, it is very top down and it's you should not do it. And it also, it doesn't really tell us why. And another one that I find tricky, develop social ecological models for reservoir management. So if you just read that recommendation, models is not clear to policymakers because they have different meanings in science and in, like, for a layperson or for a policymaker. And I wouldn't know what someone wants from me to develop social ecological models right from the start. So these are actually some examples from our series. So that was pretty much the input.